this idea of like each of the attachment types having their dominant center sort of off on its own, not really talking or integrated with the other centers. It's almost like I think that like those types are doing that, like basically like the three has sort of grafted on a fake heart.
Ooh. Jesus.
Ouch, dude.
The big hormone enneagram.
Hi, I'm John Lukovich, sexual self-pres 4 with 5 wing, 458 trifix.
Hi, I'm David Gray, self-pres sexual 9 with 1, 974 trifix.
What up? It's Emeka. I'm an 8 wing 7, sexual self-pres with 854 fixes.
Hi, I'm Nancy. I am a self-pres social 3, wing 4, with a 369 trifix. If you like our podcast, guys, make sure you go like and subscribe us on the Apple Podcast app. And if you really like us, you should definitely leave us a review.
Welcome back to the Big Hormone Enneagram. We're continuing where we left off with Courtney bringing the pain with object relations. We are getting started with type 5 and then the attachment types 3, 6, and 9. Real quick, some of y'all have asked whether we have a Patreon page or if you can send donations in. If you want to support the show, you can PayPal us a donation of whatever you choose at bhepodcast@gmail.com. That's bhepodcast@gmail.com.
Let's go to 5. So, 5. So 5 experiences rejection of the nurturing function and of the protecting function. And so there's this severing of both body and heart. And
Hey, John, sorry, just because I have some twos that I know in my life. So the other thing I would sort of say is that like part of the like they can never be appreciated enough is there, and look what I've done for you. I've given up my will. Like I don't do anything outside this world for you. And so the constant sort of like affirmation or martyred, like that is about that sacrifice that actually they want acknowledged.
So it's like they're saying, I sacrifice doing anything for myself. Like I'm
Yes.
doing everything for you.
Yeah, I sacrifice being my own independent being with my own agenda and my own confidence and capacity to do something in this world.
But usually nobody asks them to do that.
That was how they chose to respond.
Right.
That's how they chose to make sense and manage the fact that when they tried to do that, no one was there for them to help them.
Right.
Yeah, this is some deep shit.
This is fun.
It's like if you understand this, then the whole type makes sense. The whole thing makes sense once you get like, this is why.
Yeah.
This is why it's so desperate. This is there's so.
This is the last episode of the podcast.
This is the finale.
Yeah, we're done.
And part of me wants to talk about how like wings. We don't have time for that, but like
that might be a future. That'd be interesting.
Because I feel that two-ness rear its head sometimes, where I'm like, I do everything for you, and people are like, I never asked you that. And I'm like, oh. So anyway, continue.
So before I was so rudely interrupted, type 5. So rejection of heart and body, right? Double rejection type. And there's like, I don't know how to be in the world. And so, I sever my body and my heart and I just become head. And, avarice is, I think, typically misunderstood. It's this, sense of like, I am so without, I'm so limited, I'm so diminished. Because from this point of view, that's true. Like they've severed themselves so much. And so everything feels like a demand. Everything feels like it's going to like totally like not just overwhelm me, but like annihilate me. And I need to pull back like the 4. I need to like who's the double frustration. You got double rejection. Like both are like about pulling back from the world. Like the world or the material, whatever, has like nothing to offer me. And, just like the 4 going deep, but through the lens of the mental center and, hyper focus.
It's like the 5 has said, I agree. The only way I can exist here and be here is actually by not existing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
Which
I'm
needs
starting
to
to
be
see it.
differentiated from the 9 version of that, right? We'll
Well,
get
I'm
to
starting
that.
to see like the withdrawn types, like the 4 saying that I can't exist in this world, and the 5 saying a similar thing, but from a different center.
Mhm.
Yes.
And so that's interesting.
And let me
And
tell
for
you, when you got a 5 wing, oh, it's this.
Cherry on top.
and but also you can sort of see that, like in relationships, how different that's going to play out. Like for the 4 to engage is to risk losing the sense of self that has been so carefully curated and nurtured and developed all by themselves. And the 5, it's like, look, we made an agreement. Like the way we exist here, so that we don't have to really talk about what's going on underneath the wounds that are happening, is to be in the relationship, but to not be in the relationship at all, to do both.
Hmm.
Because we agreed that was better. I agreed that was better, a better poison to drink than having to acknowledge and confront over and over again that you're not seeing me and you're not helping me function in the world.
Hmm.
This is why 5 to me makes sense. This corroborates 5 as like a quasi autism, right? It's a cutting off
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
not being present in a
Mm-hmm.
relationship.
Mm-hmm. And it's also like it's not hurtful, and it's not even like trying to protect themselves. It's like, this is how we agreed we'd do it. Like, this is how I understand this to work. I'm not actually supposed to be in this for you, or you for me.
Damn. Yeah. And yeah, my dad's a 5, and I know a lot of 5s pretty well. And there's a way that, at least my experience is that 5s can impose like an idea of a relationship over an actual relationship. And so in a sense, it's like they might be fulfilling like the demands of being father or being whatever, but they're more operating on a more fundamental level from the sense of, hey, we agreed I'm not really even here.
Can you say a little bit more how have you seen that play out?
Well, yeah, it's like, like if you get like a 6 wing with a 5, like my dad's got a 6 wing, there comes these internalized expectations of how one ought to be. And so it's like a conflict between I don't really exist and I need to be doing these things.
Hmm.
And so like I'll see 5 sometimes being the partner or being the friend or being the parent, but in a kind of robotic way where it's like they're not really there. They're mentally occupied, and they might be like fulfilling or checking off the box of what they ought to be doing, but it's like there's that absent 5 quality where it's like I'm not really fully existing.
That's interesting. It's like participating, but actually not.
Yes.
Exactly.
And also being told the way to participate is to not participate. It's self-protective for the 4. For the 5, it's like alien, to do it any other way. It's not logical. This is how we decided we were going to do this. Like, so it's like you're asking me to do. It's not even that I can't do it. Like, I don't want to do it. It's like you're asking me to do something that I just have. It's never occurred to me. I've never been asked to do it before. I've never this is just not how the game is played. So there's this refusal, right? But it's not a charged refusal in the same way that the 4 has, the like slamming the door as you like leave, the like, it doesn't have that frustration and sort of
That Ilaria quality.
like, this is
What?
like,
I don't
This
know.
is really drama. This is really high drama because there's a lot at stake here. It's my fucking self here. Like, it's my soul. So don't even like
Right.
ask me to do this. The 5, it's this like kind of like opaque, like it's not, I'm trying to like think of like, it's like asking me to fly. And it's like, what? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know what I mean?
totally.
Like, I'm not supposed to know how to do that. Like,
Are you asking me that?
Which is a kind of pre-rejection, right, of everything. Does that make sense?
Say more. I'm not really clear.
Well, I'm not supposed to know how to do that is kind of like I've pre-rejected all of reality.
like, like I'm not supposed to, so I'm not doing it.
Yeah, in a way.
Yeah.
But it's not. It doesn't have that emotional charge of 4.
Right.
It's just an impassive turning away or something, or a wall.
yeah, and I think that's right, because it's like, if you think about like why it's happening, it's like, I would rather do that than experience the wound. And so the way I'm going to make sense of this is to sort of like adopt your logic of like, you didn't see me. And instead of experiencing that as like a pain that I need to, feel and address, we're gonna assume that wasn't on the table to begin with.
Yeah. It's like, oh, you're right. I don't exist. And oh,
Right.
you're right. Like, I'm not supposed to. No one can help me figure out what I'm supposed to do.
I'm gonna break up with you before you break up with me.
Yeah.
Or I've already broken up with everybody in the world.
That's it. The world is disinvited.
It is actually as David was saying, there is a protective quality to it. It's just sort of like anticipatory in a way that's like a little different than the 4.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Head types you'd kind of call anticipatory in general, right?
Hmm.
In a way, it's like, how am I going to navigate reality?
Yeah, one thing that really stands out to me about 5 that just kind of comes off weird is that, like, within the context of 5s submitting their typing videos and watching a 5 making the effort to describe themselves, like, oh, they're talking about their interests. So they're talking about their interests, and all of a sudden it's like there's a cutoff point where it's like, but no, we're not. The assumption is that I'm not even supposed to be doing this, or no one would even either understand or care. And it's like, you're doing this thing, which is trying to talk about yourself, but then just like cutting it off. So I see that pattern over and over again, where a 5 will be talking about something, and then they just abruptly stop the explaining, or just like, oh, there's this part that you will never know about. And it's just like, where did that come from? Just like, the starting assumption is that I'm not even here. You can't see me, and nothing in this world can help me figure out what I'm supposed to do. So just to see that the effort of trying to even talk about yourself is like trying to talk about something that doesn't exist.
And another piece of it is that you're cut off even from your emotional experience of that.
Yes.
Whereas 9s are sensitive about the not being seen, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, let's get into our juicy attachment types then,
Yeah.
to get to the real dark town.
It's really interesting to think about the attachment types like being this closed loop and all that kind of stuff. Like, for me, like, as I was trying to understand all of this, it was always so clear with the 3 what was going on. And then I could like apply the template and sort of like, if that's true for the 3, then what would that mean about the 6? Then what would that mean about the 9?
Mm-hmm.
For me, like, really sort of all of the thinking about this happened because I am an attachment type, and you guys would talk about it, and it would just like not have any meaning for me. I was like, why is this word being used? Like, how is it helping me see myself more clearly? Like, it just didn't register.
Courtney, we bring you on here and you just shit on our podcast.
I didn't think she would be the first one to throw bombs. But
God damn it.
Nothing we say made sense to her.
Well,
Well,
we're happy to see that we created the impetus for you to get all this knowledge. So you're welcome.
So we'll take credit for this.
No, I really think that like it like is testament to like how each one of them is kind of like a mind fuck. Like you just have these certain assumptions about how the world works, and because minor attachment, it doesn't have any meaning to me, because it's like I'm just sort of assuming actually that the way that which I'll get into, is like how everyone approaches relationships, and it's not at all. And so that for me, like that's why I think really talking about it instead of just using these labels actually matters quite a bit, because in particular for the type that you are, it's like it's your water while everyone else sees it as like, like mud.
And that gets at one reason why 6s and 9s sort of can't imagine, especially like the 4 and 5 space. Like,
Yeah.
in a lot of these forums, that they want to say, but they're human, so they can't be this rejecting of everything. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
come on, you're exaggerating, right?
Yeah.
Because
Oh, baby.
attachment,
No.
because attachment types think everybody does it the way they do it. That's part of attachment. Anyway.
All right. So for attachment, and also just like whatever, this is just my talking about myself, but I had to actually do the frustration and rejection types first in order to even like understand what was happening in the attachment. Like that's how foreign or sort of like unexcavated the concept was for me in my own self. Like you only know the grammar of your own language sometimes until when you learn another language, and then you
Right.
see the structure in contrast to what else was going on over there. But because you sort of like soaked it up, you don't even know it. So for the 3, like the baby is sitting there, she's on her back, she's looking up, she smiles, the mom doesn't smile back. And the baby, I don't even think says, "You don't see me." I think the baby says, "I don't feel seen." That's weird. Like yesterday I did. I wonder why. I wonder if I cried a little, would she see me then? I wonder if I started moving my arms, would she see me then? Maybe this is actually being seen, and I just need to understand. I don't understand what being seen means. Maybe that's what's going on here, and I just didn't understand it properly. The attachment type, basically, in response to the not feeling seen, refuses to acknowledge that it could be a failing on the part of the parent, and instead says, "I should do something differently, and then maybe I will feel seen."
It's adaptive, right? It's adapting to the
Yeah.
parental. Yeah.
One thing that really struck me when Courtney was first sharing this with me was, I think you said something like, "I will make myself okay with this." Like, if I'm getting the level, if this is what love is, like, I will make this level of love okay. Like, I'm gonna decide that this is okay, or like make like somehow settle with this.
Do you know the thing that stands out to me in contrast to the other ones is that to be frustrated, you'd have to know what you want and that what you're getting doesn't match up to what you want.
Yeah.
And it's such a crazy thing to assume when you're a fucking child. How the fuck do you know what you're supposed to be getting? So
Hey, I knew. All right.
It's like a made up thing, right? So it's like with attachment, it's more, attachment seems more normal because you're a blank slate and whatever you get is what you get. And so it's almost like the other ones are the weird ones, because to give up on what you got as a child is like that means that you somehow know what you're supposed to get. Or for the rejection type to say that I'm just going to cut off the whole thing, that's a pretty extreme stance to take. But as a child, it's like you would think that this is a blank slate and what I'm getting is what I'm supposed to be getting. So it actually makes the most sense.
Yeah, no, and
Yeah.
that's why I think that's the explanation for why the attachment types are actually the most common, because it is like the least extreme, the least violent, the least risky sort of response.
It is the
Like-
most normal.
Yeah, it's the most logical.
Like if you imagine being a baby, I mean, like you can't survive, right, without your parents. And so to be like a little baby and be like, fuck you, you just didn't give me what I need. Like who does that? You know, like
Yeah.
Like-
Yeah.
your survival hinges on them.
Yeah.
And you are willing to put that at risk in a way that
Yeah.
is really hard.
So all the rejection and frustration babies died off
They
because they would be
didn't
too
make it.
difficult.
I wish.
It would make life so much easier, right?
And the rejection types are not quite as like accusatory, but they're still pretty violent. They're just self-inflicting.
Yeah.
And the attachment type is like, how can I keep this still very cozy and yet deal with this wound?
I mean,
How can I keep both happy? How can both coexist?
it's fascinating to put it like this because one of the ways I think of sloth for the 9 is I'll settle with this. And the attachment types, it's a certain kind of settling.
Totally. Yeah.
Mhm.
This is good enough.
Yes.
Or I'm going to adapt to it again.
Because why would you not?
This is the universe, so I have to adapt.
Well, it doesn't necessarily feel like adapting when you're looking at it from the standpoint of a child, because it's like, what's the precedent?
Right. It's like,
know,
this
like-
is what I have to do, so it's what I
You know,
do.
it's like your sense of self is still in development, and you don't know what love is or what attention is. It's like I'm just going to make it work, or make this work seems like the most logical, normal kind of response.
That's an important phrase. That's an important phrase. I'm going to make this work.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or at least I'm going to try to make this work. I mean, I kind of understand, like, initially, if I'm not getting the attention that I want, that to sit there and sort of figure out, like, well, what happened? Maybe if I did this, or maybe she's having a bad day, or, that seems like the reasonable response.
I always get so confused with people who have just the initial rejection reaction. It always blows my mind because I'm like, how are you so confident in the fact that this is how it is for you? I don't know. It just confuses me.
Yeah, and I'm just noticing how knee jerk that is, because when I sit here and I think through it, there are a lot of different factors that could be at play as to why a certain situation happens. But I recognize how I'm immediately jumping to the conclusion that they don't care about me anyway. So if you sit down and you think about it, it's like, well, there are lots of different reasons why this might have happened. Or maybe they had a bad day or whatever. But yeah, it's really interesting to actually think through it, see what makes sense. Like, it makes sense to try to make it work. At least try to make it work, if that makes sense. But that it sort of really illustrates just how extreme frustration and rejection those stances are, because those don't make sense.
I agree.
It took me multiple years of therapy to realize that other people might simply just be saying things out of spite and not actually be helpful. Like, I don't always need to take in their recommendations. I'm like, oh, my
What do you mean?
therapist was like, because like one time at work, my boss suggested that I do something a little different, and I was talking to my therapist. I was like, she's totally wrong. Why? I don't know why she's. And she's like, you don't have to take like recommendations from people.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Like you're taking stuff on, just almost like there's this sense of, it's like kind of like how it is. Like you
Yeah.
take it on. I see.
Yeah, it's like, oh yeah, well obviously you say this and you are right, so I will do this. And it's like, they're not always right.
Yeah. God, that
Yeah,
is.
there's a
opposite.
real assumption of like the parent kind of being static for the attachment types, right? And change is not possible on their side, or it's not to be expected, or not to be like it's all over here on me. These things are poles. These are poles on the ground that I have to
Work around.
and figure out how to develop a sense of self and how to function given what they do.
That's an important distinction, because in my head I'm thinking, well, they can change, but for the attachment types, it's like I have to change. I have to make this work.
Yeah. I think that's right.
Yeah, that's something that really strikes me with, well, sixes especially, because they're pretty active and get into situations that are frustrating. Situations that they want to get out of, but they're still trying, in a way, trying to justify sort of a right and wrong stance, even as they're leaving. Talking to my good friend who's going through a breakup right now, and she's dealing with a horrible ex and who was accusing her of all kinds of crazy shit. And on the call, she's trying to justify to me and to herself, like, I did the right thing, I was trying to tell him that I didn't do the wrong thing. And this is someone who's already broken up with her. And I in my mind, I was just thinking, this person is practically dead to you. Like, why are you still thinking about the accusations that they made towards you? And so there's this way with the attachment types of always trying to make the thing work. Like, I have to be the one to change.
And even all the arguing, the she's sort of doing an argument there, and that's an attachment, right? Like
Right.
the to and fro of it, and the combativeness of six is sometimes how they're attaching in a way.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think so. This is the other thing that like is the special mind fuck of the attachment types is, so you have this thing that we just sort of talked about, this like relational, this affect, which is the attachment. And what I think is happening for the attachment types is basically this is like an inability to individuate. And what happens though is that we all do need to individuate. And the ego is very, very invested in the idea that you are individuated. So I think something kind of additional happens for the attachment types, which, and I think this is an explanation for some of the ways they work with their centers differently than how, and I think that's like a whole nother call around sort of how the personality constructs and has the centers relate to one another. The attachment types do that a little bit differently, right, than the other types. And the reason I think they do it that way is I basically think that the attachment types they're trying to thread the needle of maintaining a false story of individuation while holding on to attachment and refusing to give that up. And the way that they do this is different, I think, for each of them. For the three, it's almost like what they decide to do is say, actually, not only am I just going to settle for this, I'm actually going to understand myself in the way that I've adapted. In the way you've asked me to show up, I'm now going to see that as myself. And now I'm going to feel individuated because I have a sense of self. It just happens to be false. It happens to be actually adapted in response to how the nurturing kind of caregiver figure, what they wanted, what caused them to show up. And this idea of like each of the attachment types having their dominant center sort of off on its own, not really talking or integrated with the other centers, it's almost like I think that like those types are doing that, like basically like the three has sort of grafted on a fake heart.
Oof. Jesus.
Ouch, dude.
Why'd you come on here to stab us today? What are you doing?
Just like dagger to the heart, man.
Murdering everybody.
Or my fake heart? I don't know.
And so they're gonna create this individuated self where the body and the mind and this fake heart work together, and it's gonna feel autonomous, but it's a lie. And so that lie can be sustained, they need to keep their real heart way far away from that. And they need to deaden it and make it not really pay attention. Because if it starts waking up, the jig is up.
Well, then you're possibly separating, right? You're not attaching.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes. this crisis of real individuation, which should have happened. It happens way too early, basically, for the 1, 7, and 4, and for the 3, 6, 9, it now needs to happen much later.
And because it's later, it's more of a pattern, so it's harder to detach.
So it's like threes are having to cut off the heart, the real heart.
Yeah, that like kind of numb it, keep it busy, and you keep a heart busy by keeping it quiet.
Ouch.
Damn. You got to think about that one for a couple years, man.
I've been thinking about it for many years.
Oh God, that is
What's
heavy.
terrifying is when you're a 3 and you just literally have no idea why you've done anything in life ever.
Yeah.
It's great.
I mean, it's this, and that's why, I mean, I know you guys have spoken about it, this midlife crisis that's so kind of typical for a 3, but it's like my whole life is a lie. It's the waking up to the replacement the replacement of this heart, this fake heart that has oriented and helped them, like been the way they've understood themselves and the way they've understood the world is actually not real. And the real heart has been dampened for a really long time. So it's tempting to think that there's actually just nothing. And that's very, very scary. And it might feel better to stay with the fake one, whether the risk there being nothing.
It kind of feels like waking up in a life where there's a clone of you and you then have to take the clone spot.
Wow.
Dark Town.
Yeah.
Yep. It's great. Well, I'm gonna go sleep on that depressing shit. So you guys keep going, and can't wait to see what you have to say about 6s and 9s.
All right, good night, Nancy.
Okay, night.
Sleep well.
I will. Bye.
Bye.
I mean, I'm actually like a pretty happy, joyful person to be around. I like.
That's
Are
actually
you?
not true.
Are you? Stop lying. No, this is really good stuff. This
No,
really,
this is great. This
yeah.
is great.
This really opens up the types of.
We love the dark.
Yeah. No, it just really shed some light on. I mean, all the types, but 3ness. I've had some episodes with some 3s, and it's like the separation between the real heart and the replacement heart really opens up that whole type structure for me of what that conflict is, of wanting the fear of really being affected in the heart space, like for real, versus like the machine of this is what I got to do. So it really illuminates the type for me in a very different way, that to see it at the root. This is the thing. This is the driver.
And the real crisis that could happen, that will happen.
And it helps me understand some of the things that I've always felt, just observing 3s that I didn't really understand. Like there's a sense that I get from 3s of over composure, of kind of real time sort of reactions, and regardless of how wild the 3 might seem, it seems like they just have it. They're trying to keep it together in the moment, but it feels restricted in some kind of way. And I've always trying to figure out like where is that coming from, but understanding that there's a sort of maintaining a replacement heart going on really helps me understand like why 3 seem kind of restricted in that kind of way.
And the sense of like fakeness or shallow, and all those things that the 3 and maybe the attachment types more generally get accused of is not wrong, but it also doesn't register, right? Because they're kind of lying to themselves at the same time.
Yeah. That's one of the things we noticed that we talked about on the 3 call, is that for 3s in the moment, they do actually believe that that they're meeting or matching that person. They're actually taking that in. It's not like a 3 saying, well, I'm going to manipulate this person. And like, it's not a conscious choice. It's like, it's an actual real absorption of, or replacement of realness that feels real to the 3 or the 6 or 9 in the moment. It's not to say that 3s can't manipulate, but it just the mechanism is real for them.
And you can also sort of feel also like if you were like a little baby doing it thousands and thousands of times, how well intentioned it is.
Hmm.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Because I think that there's this sense of how each of the types handles the fact that they adapt and sort of makes sense of that. I think, and that's why I talk about this like false heart for the three and having it kind of probably kind of calcified around, you know, what worked for my primary caregiver. And
Mm.
I'm going to identify that as me.
Mhm.
And then they're still absorbing and still molding and sort of in order to create a feeling of connection in the moment, because they can still take that information in and still do that kind of machination. But I think the three understands that more as like a skill, like something that they're doing to function in the world. And the false heart stays still, then so they can sort of stay still. I still know who I am, even though I can do this. I can get along with lots of groups, and or like whatever. I've got lots of different relationships. That's just me, like being cool in the world. Like I still have a sense of self that is stronger and more individuated than that. And that is the harder piece, I think. So, and I think that there's varying degrees actually, depending on like what their instinct stacking is and what their trifix is, like how much where they are on sort of like how calcified it is around like an identity, probably that's oriented toward a primary caregiver versus a willingness to sort of adapt sense of self and how in touch they are with that. Like, I think that there's probably a continuum for threes, depending on this other stuff sort of flavoring it. But for even those threes that are like, this is me, this is what I like, if they like are that in it, I sort of wonder if it's in something that's actually not really who they are.
From my experience with threes, I'm always surprised at how far threes can go. I've talked about some of the parallels between 3 and 9, and some of the frustrations I have with 9 is just how far a 9 will go along with something that they were never really into to begin with, and it just seems absolutely insane. Just
Mhm.
how long that can go. And I see a similar thing with threes where they can be so cut off from their real heart that they can expel a lot of energy making things happen for something that I'm almost convinced that this is what they've always wanted all along. It's just it's a much more active, assertive version of what the 9 is doing. Yeah.
Hmm. Okay, so the 6. So the little girl is like walking toward the doll. She's feeling very unsteady on her feet, not sure she can do it. She looks up, no one's paying any attention. She says, no one's here for me. No one's here to help me make sure I can do this. What do I have to do to make them show up for me? And what is hard to like kind of like get your mind around, and I like sometimes I get it and sometimes it's elusive, even as like I'm a 6, is they're in the way of sort of like being seen. Like if you truly feel seen and feel unconditional love from like in the 3 space, you actually shouldn't do anything, right? You shouldn't have to do anything at all. You should just be. And the 3 is kind of perverting that with like, I actually have to do because I got to adapt in order to be seen. The 6, it's a little bit different because what they're trying to do is actually do. They're actually trying to function and identify what they want and then to have confidence in their ability to get it. And what happens, I think, for the 6 now is what was initially super focused energy on like, how do I get to that doll or toy or whatever? And how do I put one foot in front of the other to get what I want? How I organize that and how I actually, where I put my foot and how I do it is now been kind of perverted to like, actually, how do I put my foot so that someone notices and helps me and cheers me on?
Mhm.
The intentionality of the action, instead of it like I know what I want, I'm going after what I want and I can do it. That felt sense has been replaced by, do I feel supported? Do I feel like someone is here for me? Because that's all I care about now. That's the thing. That's now my new goal. It's not about the toy anymore. It's about getting a felt sense. of being guided.
regardless of what you're trying to do in the world.
Yes.
When we were first talking about this, you also used the term perverted, and I can't remember exactly how it was, but it really struck me that the impulse to do or function, the impulse to do something independently of one's own will, gets perverted or mixed with this need to elicit that kind of support. And so anytime there is the sixes, you know, volition comes up, that suddenly gets mixed in with this early life need to elicit the support.
And gets subverted,
Right.
because now it's not about like, all right, I wanted that doll, but he wasn't paying any attention. Wow, what if I instead go for the cookie? Will you pay attention now? And so, and I'm willing to do that. I'm willing to give up what I wanted, what I thought I wanted, so that I can have a felt sense of being supported and guided.
Right. Right.
This makes a lot more sense now why sixes will run wild doing a whole bunch of shit. Um, just just a whole bunch of crazy shit just so they can maintain this sort of connection. Maybe it's just being paid attention to. Could be anything. I guess with depending on the instincts. We've seen some social sixes that just live off being paid attention to online, just being talked about. And I this really puts into perspective how it doesn't matter what they're doing. It's like, I'm gonna go do this, I'm gonna do this, and whatever it takes to get people for a social six paying attention or having people relating to them in some kind of way, even if it's negatively.
Being on the team, that they're trying to make a team for themselves, so to speak.
Yeah, it,
And
it
I
feels
think,
like whatever support means for that six. Like, I'm gonna do all kinds of shit, whatever it is to get it.
and I think the other thing is because the guidance function shows up later than the nurturing function. I actually think that there's probably like a greater variety of people who are actually informing the infant or toddler's understanding of that. And so, first of all, I think this is why you get like kind of like a wider range of behavior
Hmm.
in this six, because it's like whatever registered support, it was, it that I yelled, was it that I whimpered, was it that I pretended I didn't need it, like, you know, like there's like you can get a whole big sort of wide variation in what was sort of codified and understood as the way to get people to pay attention and help you and give you a felt sense that you could function in the world. And also because it can also be like, so, like it's kind of a function of the specific environment that you're in, right? Like what elicits a response in a classroom in your daycare facility for the like owner to like for the babysitter or whatever to like show up and help you versus like what happens with your sibling and your mom or your dad. They're going to be very different sort of relationships, and it's going to cause a lot of kind of like inconsistency and potentially a lot of conflict in the six, because it's like under this circumstance this is what I did, under that circumstance that was what I did, how do I like what do I do here, you know, like that kind of like feeling. These impulses that really seem illogical actually have a logic to them.
Different kinds
And
of
that,
adaptations going on in different environments.
yeah, six makes a lot more sense to me now because it seems like you're saying it seems illogical and it seems irrational, but it does have a logic. It's like, you know, it might seem like this person is just flailing around doing things self-contradictory behaviors and actions that don't seem to have any coherence, but they do. It's about like trying to orient to what's going to get me support and not knowing what it's going to be, and so just throwing a bunch of shit at the wall to see what's going to do that.
And also to the point earlier made about, I think, like we were joking at the beginning of the call about attaching and through fighting or
Mm.
through being like against that behavior of six, where I've seen a lot of sixes be consistently attached to something by being against or reactive to or in combat with.
Hmm.
I mean, that makes more sense. That those behaviors make more sense from this point of view.
And then the other thing that I think makes it even like a little, I mean, I think makes sense once you sort of understand it, but like in the beginning doesn't make sense, is in the same way that like the three now faces this crisis of individuation, but they've been constantly sort of adapting a sense of self. They kind of settle and say, like, what I did to make her see me, that's really me. The six, like when you think about like what functioning is, like the guidance function is sort of is the mind, right? And this super ego function that develops in the six, it is basically a way to maintain the lie, to maintain the outer input into what I should do and how and what's going on and how do I maintain support, because that's been replaced, right, by like what I actually want or what I actually am capable of. All of those questions are now being like run through this channel of like what gets me support, what causes people to show up for me, what makes people cheer me on. Like that's that question is now replacing what do I want in life, what do I do in life. But I can't be a grown up if I'm still asking that question. So I basically kind of develop a fake mind where that sort of grasping for like what creates support for me is basically sort of like what do I need to do in order to for the world to show up for me, this super ego function of a bunch of shoulds.
And instruction books for how to do it.
Yeah.
That's a replacement for your own mind. Give me the
Yes.
instruction book for how I'm supposed to do each and everything.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And that's mine, that my fake mind is going to like work with my heart and my body, and this pretty intuitive mind of mine that is going to figure this out. If it gets too close, we need to keep it really, really busy.
Mm,
Hmm.
yeah.
We we need to give it like a lot of math, like
Hmm.
a lot of puzzles.
A lot of grids.
A lot of
Grids.
like, yeah, like a lot of Excel spreadsheets, a lot of like projects to manage, like
Yeah.
keep it busy.
Sixers are always asking like, what should I do? It's almost like they can't separate that from what's going to give me support.
Yeah. And I think in the same way that the three, when they realize what's going on, there's this real, or like when they start getting hints of what's going on, there's this real fear that actually, if I let go of this false heart, because I've left the other heart dead for so long, there may be nothing. The six, our sense of what we want and what we're capable of is really not very well developed.
Hmm.
And so we're not only are we like have a habit of, you know, I'm asking you what I should do. What I'm really asking you is, what should I do so that you'll support me? I just can't say that because that would be too embarrassing. So I'm just going to ask you, what should I, what should I do? Like, there's that. And there's also, I actually don't really know what I want and what I'm capable of because I've stopped asking that question a long time ago.
So that becomes a fake mind, is
Yeah,
the asking for support.
yeah. And losing touch with what I really want and what I'm capable of. Because all of that's now being run through a set of shoulds and manuals and outside external.
Based on what support you think you'll get. That's a fucking prison right there.
Hmm.
That is a hopeless one right there. So it's like the attachment types just can't individuate. It's a fake individuation. That's what's
Yes,
going on.
yes, that's what I think. There's a lie, a fundamental self-deception.
Which explains why it's because the majority of people on planet Earth, like let's say half the people, half the population is attachment types or 6 or 9. I would say the majority of people are attachment types. How fucking impossible it is to even conceive of what 4 and 5 are doing,
Mm-hmm,
rejecting both functions.
mm-hmm,
That
mm-hmm,
doesn't even make sense.
mm-hmm,
Yeah.
mm-hmm,
Yeah.
mm-hmm. That's right. And this is also part of the reason why I think sixes are so focused on contradiction, hypocrisy, trust, lying, like all like because they kind of know a little bit they're doing it themselves.
Mm-hmm.
They feel it in themselves, and so it must be happening over there too.
It's also, maybe this is almost tangential, but it's one reason, like this brainwashing and all iterations of that is kind of a six-ish concern. So,
Yeah.
like somebody's going to control my mind.
It's already happening.
Right. Yeah.
hmm
Those
And
people want to control how I think. And there's a possibility that they will, right? That's the problem, right? Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
a vulnerability to it,
Yeah.
an unspoken but sensed vulnerability.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I think like some of that intensity, like it's like like we're basically running like two operating systems. Like is hot, like
Yeah.
like in the
Mhm.
computer, like there's a lot of steam that needs to be
Mhm.
like run off because of that tension. And I think also like a lot of the phobic stuff gets sort of like explained by this too, both in terms of the fact that there's a greater variation, right, in terms of what elicits support. And
Mhm.
that's why I sort of feel like most sixes are like a combination of phobic and counterphobic,
For
Yeah,
sure.
that makes
and
sense.
it's depending on how they're understanding. But I also think that some of what we call counterphobia is actually when the real mind takes over and there's a clarity about what needs to happen. And because the six is very good already at like, once the mind decides to do something, we're going to do it. When the real mind kind of is allowed to run the show, it can be very fast.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the key overlooked gifts of six is intuition. And, that it usually is like a functional intuition. Like I know what to do, or I see what's happening in like a larger sense of seeing. And, like the counterphobic feels like a way that it's just, oh shit, like I'm like just needing to go into action to shut the mind up. But when the real mind shows up, there's a decisiveness and boldness that I think from the outside can seem counterphobic to some people, but it's got such a different flavor and quality.
Yeah.
Um, sometimes like with a six, you're like, holy fuck, like who just got home?
Yeah.
Because it's like it's all the like, and then suddenly it's like, and they're just like, boom, 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 like really knowing what to do and executing without all the usual shit around it.
Now, I see
And
something similar with three around identity. What I've experienced with threes is like no one can size you up in terms of what you kind of seem like or what you represent better than a three. It's almost like,
How you think of yourself.
yeah, just like they can really spot that stuff. And it's kind of eerie, the ability like of that they have that ability, even though they might be divorced from their real heart. But there is a sense that all of a sudden they have crystal clear vision on what you're about. Kind of like the six channeling that practical intuition all of a sudden, even though they're, you know, going
Mhm.
crazy all over the place most of the time. It's like all of a sudden, boom, they got it. And so threes kind of have that ability around the heart.
And the self-image, maybe one way to say it with three.
Yeah. Some kind of clear sight on self identity, self image. It's always interesting how, and that's something that I've recognized with that whole three thing is that I find it interesting because sexual types are usually useless from in terms of working in companies and things like that. There's not a whole lot of practical use for that instinct, but I've noticed how sexual threes end up being able to work in a lot of branding type marketing work, which I feel like draws on this ability to be able to narrow in on what is attractive to people and what it stands for and being able to translate that. I just there's a lot of practical sense to like a practical identity in
Mhm.
that world. So I often see, like I find it interesting to see how some sexual threes will end up in these kind of jobs and roles that have to do with, being able to work with how people view themselves. So that could be
Mhm.
marketing design or graphic design that has that in a practical sense, and like something like a Nike or some kind of big company could make use of.
Well, and I think you said this once on a podcast before, this idea of the attachment types kind of listening more.
Hmm.
And, I don't, listening, I think is like a little bit hard of a word with the three, but I think they are very, very attuned. And if you
Yes.
can imagine being a baby and having to like watch your mom to see if her eyebrow moves differently,
Yep.
like that level of attention to what's resonating with another individual.
Yeah, it's a
Super
little bit
important.
uncomfortable dealing with threes because some types are more comfortable because it's not like they're not tracking you. And what I feel like when I'm with threes is that every single reaction of mine is being reacted to, and especially with well, with the sexual three, that's like on steroids because it's like the feeling of, is he, am I still interested? Like, if I tell him that I was watching the show, is he going to think I'm lame? That kind of a thing. Like on a micro level, it feels really sensitive. Like my
Hmm.
reactions are a big deal. But on and the positive side of that is that you're really being paid attention to. But then the negative side of that is like, the whole house could come crumbling down. Like a reaction could really change the mood. Yeah, it feels really constricted. I start to feel like what the three feels like inside is that there is a way that things need to fit, and if you react a certain way, or this can ruin everything.
Yeah, there's a real sensitivity there that I think sometimes gets overlooked because of the achievement orientation,
Hmm.
and sometimes the willingness to really step on people to get or to hurt people to um, get what you want or to get meet your objective. But there's actually a lot of awareness as to what's resonating with people and not. Okay, I'll move to the nine. I do like think that there's just like a missing of like how sixes do not understand themselves to be like the architects of their lives. I think this sort of like the replacement of like the questions of what do I want and what do I'm good at? What am I good at? Or what can I do? What am I capable of? To have those questions over and over again be replaced by how do I get people to support me? There's just a real giving away, right, of
Hmm.
your agency in your life, because your life is now about getting others to help you get what you want, as opposed to getting, and you may change what you want just to make sure then that there's someone on the right side of there along you helping you get it. Like that has become what I'm all about, as opposed to what do I want in my life. And I think that there's a lot of fallout from this fundamental lack of agency, um, that the six has kind of conditioned him or herself to feel about themselves.
I think that's a good point because something that we'll talk about of sixes and nines identifying with four is like the need. There's a recognition of a need to individuate and a need to be that architect, or that my life is in my own hands, and a kind of I guess insecurity around it. And so sometimes like the identification with four becomes a way for those types to, I don't know, explore or be more conscious of, or somehow label that anxiety around needing to individuate. It's like there's like a confusion that, oh, four is trying to individuate, so I have trouble with individuation. I know I need to, and so I must be a four. Versus like the four thing is like I'm already an individual, like it already happened.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm. Yeah. And I just think from like a relationship perspective, like there's so many times like in retrospect where like I gave way too much authority to someone without them even like no, like when you think about like habits, like,
Mhm.
and we like when we talked about like the four giving up on the relationship, and the eight kind of self-sacrificing and anesthetizing themselves to hurt The 6 is basically saying, I'll do whatever it takes. Like, but you be here.
Holy
Some
fuck.
toxic shit right here, man.
And I've said it in a really extreme way, and of course it's really obvious when it's happening that way, but there's like a lot of very subtle times I think this is happening, that 6s are like not even aware that they're doing.
Sure, totally.
So anyway, we could talk a lot more about all of that, because I think a big thing for 6s is like coming out of this victim role.
Yeah.
Okay, so the 9, like David, you can like guess what I'm going to say. Like if the 3 has a fake heart and the 6 has a fake mind, I think the 9 has a fake
existence,
a fake body.
Yeah.
And so basically, I think this crisis, as I was talking about before, for all of the attachment types, of how do I sell myself a story of individuation that does not put at risk my sense of attachment. And here it's basically to like practically everything, right? Like all. So I think the 9 is telling themselves a story, which is like, I actually don't have a body.
And what does that mean, not having a body?
I don't have an ego, really. Like I don't have a sense of boundaries and a separate sense of self at all. Like I'm connected to everything. Like I'm actually of this world.
Because I don't have boundaries, I'm connected to everything.
Yeah. Like if you think about the 9, and we can do it, like you think about the 9, like to get a sense of self, I feel seen. They're molding and adapting and trying to elicit that feeling, and they'll do like all kinds of things. Simultaneously, as they're trying to figure out what they want in the world, they're also watching and figuring out what solicits support, what makes them feel secure. Like if that is basically like, if you do that on every dimension, that's like 90% of your life. It's just like, that's what you're constantly doing. And the only way to make sense of that and still feel individual is to say that's what an individual is, right? An individual is always one and connected with the other.
Unity and harmony.
Yeah. And so then they do various things to disassociate from their real ego, and their real sort of felt sense of self, by numbing it, by keeping it busy is another form of numbing, checking out, all the things that the 9 does to keep the body from waking up to its awareness of itself as a discrete being.
9 stuff always just makes me like laugh from the point of view of just like connected to all, like given I guess what we talked about earlier with 4 and 5, like it's totally unimaginable what that fucking means.
Doesn't even make sense. Like the thing about the fake body is like that sounds fake as fuck. Like that doesn't even register. How are you connected to everything?
David, I don't know if that language like makes sense to you, but like it's interesting when you on all of the double types, you see this like weird paradox, right? Like the 5, it's like the way I show up in the world is by not showing up. I exist in the world by not existing. The 9 is like, I have an ego. I have a sense of self by not having a sense of self. Yeah. Like by being connected to everything.
Yeah, it's kind of like you have the sense that you contain everything. You are connected to everything. I mean, some of my 9-ness is colored by I've got 7 and 4 fixes, and I'm social last, and so I'm kind of whatever, a strange 9. But underlying, there's that, and I think of myself as individualistic and so forth for a 9, right? But but there's definitely that sense of just that I could connect to anything at any time, anybody. It's just always waiting there if I wanted it. And partly that's, as you're saying, it's because of the non-individuation, right? Because if I were more distinctly in my ego, then there would be more clear and specific, impressions about everything, in the sense of I kind of like that. Maybe I'll give that a 3.5.
Yep.
I kind of like where I really like that. I don't like that. You know what I mean? Everything would be, you'd have a little bit better sense of the specifics of your responses to things.
And I was like really struck by like when you guys were doing your like never ending 9 call.
Yes.
Never ending 9.
Which is
maybe
very
this
nine.
maybe this one will tie it. I don't know.
We did like 3 of them. They just had endless shit to say. Like we were never getting anywhere.
Because we're connected to everything. Just go on forever. Yeah.
But you just saw like how closely attuned they were to people missing them.
People missing them? What do you mean?
You mean
like
missing in the
not missing them, like missing their presence, but like not getting what they were, like how sensitive they were, not that if we weren't quite getting what they were trying to say or express.
Yeah. And the like, you don't really want to know what I want, like that kind, like there's an expectation in a relationship, right, that they're not interested, that it's all about me changing around this person. Like I was thinking about it with you, Emma, when you're talking about like relationships, like the 9 has conditioned themselves to believe that you're not interested. And like I was thinking, like it's like you have to like almost ask like multiple times. And they have so understood the articulation of a sense of self as putting relationship at risk, right? They've never done that before.
Yeah. That happened on a call. Just like I think it was Tara that was talking about how she didn't feel like it was even worth speaking up or expressing herself unless she was invited to do so multiple times. And I'm just listening to it and the sense of frustration that I had, like oh, we have to invite you over and over again to be a person.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like basically saying like what kind of pizza you want is a big fucking deal.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is. If like the way you've understood relationships is like, that's not what you're supposed to do. And like the crisis that like, I mean, there's kind of a reason we go through these things, like when we're pre-verbal, I think, because it's like so painful that like, it's like circumcision or something where they do it to a baby and like the baby forgets or whatever. And then like the idea that you would do it to like an adult, the adult was like, no fucking way.
Right.
Like, and it almost has that kind of quality, I think, for the 369, just how painful this process, I think it can be like really transformative. Like, and I think that's why there's like actually like 369s can actually move quite a bit, but it's the pain is significant. And David, I don't know if that.
Yeah, I mean, it's yeah, I can't at the moment direct the spotlight at myself, but
he's doing it right now.
Right now. But
it's okay, David. You can be a person. It's fine. It's fine. You can.
Yeah, but in general though, yeah, there's that. That's actually part of what keeps it in place too, I think, is because there is the sense that you could take one step towards some kind of individuation and then the whole thing would just domino, right? And then you'd have to be totally separate from that whole thing. Now you actually are detached instead of attached, right?
Yeah.
And I think it is correct. And I think you might even be referring to Riso having said that 369 can move much faster, whereas but it's harder to make that move. And then, whereas the other types, it's a slower, more gradual, but they're more likely to make the change, if that makes sense, towards whatever, getting out of their shit.
Growth, yeah, like the triangle types make greater leaps.
Yeah,
but it takes a lot more priming, and then hexhead types, it's smaller steps.
Yep, and that makes sense.
Yeah, because the other types have basically gone through the kind of like the individuation process. They've just kind of done it in a fucked up way.
Yeah.
And they need to kind of reconcile and tweak it.
There's a word I use for 369, and I mean it in a certain way, but nostalgia. So it's like you have a nostalgia for the parental situation or whatever it is. So that's part of what's holding you back also. I mean, and I don't mean it at all like literal nostalgia, right? Because you can't quite have nostalgia for that infancy phase, right? But it's something about that parental environment, and it's maybe a retro idealization of it or something.
Mhm.
That is again another thing that's keeping you attached
Mhm.
into it.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Mhm.
it's a different. Nostalgia is the wrong word, but it's kind of the idea.
Well, in some ways, the 1, 4, and 7 are very clearly like speaking up, like you did not get it.
Yeah,
The 5, 8, and 2 are saying you didn't get it, but I agree, don't get it. Like, but the 3, 6, and 9, in some ways, put like a little bit like of like foggy glasses on the
mhm,
wound, because they've shifted every time they get a little hint of it. And so that nostalgia that you're sort of speaking about, I mean, I think there's plenty of 369s that can talk about, like, they don't look back and say, oh, my childhood was amazing or whatever. But I
right.
think the sort of like getting in touch with that fundamental miss that hasn't happened.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
They haven't acknowledged that it happened.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, damn.
Fun.
This is one of those calls I'm gonna have to. Well, I'm gonna get to listen to this multiple times, but this is one of those calls that really opens up a lot.
Yep.
Because this is some really important shit, and I feel like a lot of people, anyone who has any interest in the Enneagram, needs to hear this shit. Because fuck, just traits, descriptions, or whatever. You have to understand. This is like the real guts of the types, and you don't know what the fuck is going on until you hear this kind of shit.
Yep.
Totally.
And for me, like, I like have enjoyed being on the call, but I also, this is so six, like, for me, like a blank slate is like terrifying. Like, like I need, like, and you were talking about this too, Emika, right around like threes that are like creative, like you're like, they're always like in the mold of something.
Mhm.
And I think that I have interesting things to say, but I often need, as I was saying, like a little pressure, like a question or like a little dialogue to get it going. Just be, and maybe I should work on that. But anyway,
It's just what it is. It's just I don't think there's anything wrong with needing prompts for creativity, but it's just like six is recognizing that having a framework for creativity, but it's like really fucking amazing once that gets going. Like what sixes are able to do once they
Yep.
have something to work with.
yeah. So like, I don't like, again, I would love like lists of questions that came up from all of this.
Oh,
Like,
we're gonna have
like
plenty.
no pressure or whatever. Like, I just would love to like somehow.
God, Courtney is so demanding.
Seriously, man.
Guy.
She's giving us the instruction book.
We got homework assignments.
Taking charge of my life.
She came in and she stabbed us in the heart and then said, go home, think about it, and come
Do
back with
this.
questions.
I guess we got to call this podcast Big Courtney Enneagram. Narcissistic sixes.
But I do think that like understanding like how it connects to essence, and maybe like if you get really clear on essence, like how does that prime you to be predisposed to a certain wound and a certain framing on the wound. Like I think that would be like really cool to really explore.
That would be an intense
Totally.
another conversation, big time. Yeah.
And I've done no thinking about it.
Right.
But I'm like think that would be really cool. And I think like the trifix conversation, where I think this is actually where you guys talked about some of this a little bit already, like where your frustration versus rejection, or your withdrawal versus aggressive, or what, like those kinds of things, like getting, if you have a better handle on how the object relations work, then like, as like David, you were sort of talking about how the 4 and the 7 sort of end up changing it a little bit. And this is like in some ways like more language for how you can interact, how the trifixes can interact
Yeah.
on some of these dimensions,
Totally.
in a way that I think could be like really cool and productive.
Yeah, I think one thing, the idea that I've been working with is it's like looking at trifix as if you go into that center, it's like, okay, you are like, let's say you're a core 4 and John's got a 5 fix. Like, so in the head center, he's a 5. So all the stuff that we've talked about that has to do with 5, that's what he is working with when he's in that center. And so I like looking at it in a sort of modular way, that all the stuff that comes with that type, you're having to deal with. So it's not your type, core type, but it's pushing your core type in that direction when it's all kind of put together.
Yeah.
So like having 5 and 4 fixes, it's like, you know, it's like adding another level of self amputation to my own core 8 stuff. So it really adds a lot of
And then when they stack on top of each other, like you've got, like in my case, I've got 2 frustration types, and then I've even got a 1 wing. So I've got all 3 frustration types going against the 9 in a certain way, you might say. Yeah.
And I wonder also, just I thought that Nancy's comment around, and I think I have been thinking for a long time, there's just like so much interesting, cool stuff that people like haven't done yet. You know, like really kind of like asking a lot of questions to get like a sense of the 4 with a 5 wing, 5 with the 4 wing, you know, like all of those wing things.
Totally.
Yeah.
And using object relations, I think that they're just like, if you understand each type, there should be like asking certain questions, you could almost predict a different answer, right? And it would almost be like kind of fun. This is like a 6, but like it would be kind of fun to like, if you really understand the type, they would answer this question this way and the other type would answer this way, true or false, and then like test it.
Yeah, it gives a good framework for what trifix or the wings, you know, like if you take a 5 and you add a 4 wing to it, what is adding all that for double frustration? What does that do? What does that do to what the 5 already has? So opening this kind of stuff up really makes it easy to build on the core type stuff in a way that if someone really gets each of the 9 types, they can sort of build their own description intuitively.
Okay.
Cool.
Thanks,
This
guys.
is really
Nice
good.
meeting you, Courtney. Hopefully we'll do this again soon.
That'd be fun. That was good.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Excellent.
Okay. All
All
right.
right. Later, fools.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
I know it hurts. You know I'd quench that